coming to you from the mountain fortress of pop culture. You're listening to Time to Talk.
I am the #1 most impactful artist of our generation. I am Shakespeare in the flesh, Walt Disney.
We ain't at McDonald's, guy, so what's your beef?
Yeah, I love that line.
We're here today to talk about Love and Kisses, or Dannii, as it was titled in Australia. It's the debut album, 1991, for Australian pop legend Dannii Minogue. What are you making of this one, Simon? You love a bit of Dannii, don't you?
Yeah, I do. I really, really love Dannii. Some would say that I actually prefer Dannii to Kylie. I definitely think for the time that Dannii was popular, I prefer all of her output. There's not really you can't make a comparison because Dannii's never really toured properly and Dannii's never kind of been afforded the same opportunities, I suppose, in the same way. And their careers have gone in very different ways. You know, Dannii's done theatre and stuff and Kylie hasn't. And, you know, so yeah, but yeah, kind of, maybe, a bit.
Ooh, that's a big call. Who's the better singer?
See, okay, so technically I think Dannii is, by far. But it's not to say I don't like Kylie's voice, I do. I think Kylie's a great singer. But I think that Dannii's got a rounder, sort of fuller tone to her voice, which is why I think she's been able to cross over into theatre and stuff a lot easier.
So if she's more versatile and she's got the better voice, why? Why hasn't she had the same success? And let's also just be fair right off the bat. If she wasn't being measured against her sister, she'd probably be considered quite successful in her own right. But that comparison is really difficult for her. Why hasn't she been as big as Kylie?
I think she's had two noticeable dips in her career. And I think obviously because both Kylie and Dannii are really, really big in the UK. And when Dannii was big in the UK, she was massive. She was probably one of the biggest pop stars we've ever had over here, like, you know, for sort of hit-wise, you know, with Love and Kisses and then with Girl and then with Neon Nights. Like, she was really huge. But I think there's just been, like, the second album wasn't great. And then all the stuff with the album that got shelved after Neon Nights. And I think she's just never really... Like, it just hasn't worked, has it? Like, the wave has never been at the right time.
She just doesn't radiate that kind of mega star quality. That's how it feels to me. In saying that, her back catalogue, when we look at her music, amazing. Like, she's got some awesome music. And I always love going back through Dannii's musical career because there's always a treasure or two that I just didn't focus on when it was released at the time. You go, wow, this was... sensational work.
Yeah, especially with Love and Kisses. I think I forgot because I played that album so much as a kid and I'd forgotten half of it, and when I went back to listen to it again for this, I was like, oh god, I loved that song and I loved this song and this was so ahead of its time. And yeah, it was interesting.
It is interesting, and interesting right from the start, actually, Simon, because it was called Love and Kisses in the UK. In Australia, it was just known as Dannii because she had a huge, and still does, reputation over here. She'd been on Young Talent Time. She'd been in our homes every week for years on end. She was actually one of the biggest icons on Australian TV for many years. So we only needed to call it Dannii over here. But what I find interesting about the debut album is it's totally different for the UK and Australia. When I say totally different, some of the same songs, but completely different mixes. I remember when I heard on the grapevine the one that Stephen Bray was involved with, Baby Love, and I absolutely loved it. And I thought, oh, Dannii must be bringing out a second album. That's quick. But actually, that was recorded specifically for the debut album in your country.
Yeah, it's literally in my notes. One of the first things I wrote down was that you didn't have Baby Love on yours, which I couldn't believe because it was a massive, massive hit over here.
It felt like a lead single for album number 2, and I just believed that probably for 10 years until I started doing my homework here.
But also Japan was the same. So I think we were the only people to get Baby Love, weren't we? Because the Japanese album was the same as Yours, but it was called Party Jam instead.
Oh, they called the album Party Jam in Japan, did they?
Yeah.
Wow,
which is weird because I think that's one of my least favourite songs on the album. But yeah, they called it Party Jam in Japan, and then Love and Kisses over here.
And it was the opening track for the Australian version as well.
That's probably why they did it. It came out in 1990 in Australia as well, and then
yes, we had it before you. Exactly right. Exactly right.
And it got repackaged and re-released and remixed and everything to be released in the UK.
I think we got the better album cover, by the way. Yours is a little bit more sanitized.
But then I don't know if I love ours because it's nostalgic for me now.
Familiar.
Yeah. It got released twice. Because there was
are you talking about the deluxe edition in 2009?
No, there was an expanded edition. I was talking to Lee about this the other week, and he said that, because we were chatting about this album, and he said that he'd got the double cassette version, which was called Love and Kisses and it's the one.
Yes.
It's basically what's been released now, I think, as the deluxe, but the deluxe has more on it. But Love and Kisses and had all the remixes on it and stuff.
Love and Kisses and, which, was released very shortly after the original version. It just had a few 12 inches, but most importantly, it had the silky 70s mix of Baby Love.
Yes.
Which I love.
Yeah, I do as well. That's great. Oh, this is nice. I thought you were going to be really damning about this album, and you've been quite nice about it so far.
Okay, let's put the context around this. Simon's been scared. He's been sitting there just braced as if he's going down in a plane as soon as he got on the line. Worried that I was going to be, tearing shreds?
Well, every time we talk about Dannii, you always talk, and even in other podcasts, you've always talked about her kind of knowingly negatively towards me, as though it's going to rile me. So I was like, okay, you're doing this because you want to get a rise out of me.
Look, here's the thing. Dannii Minogue, early in her career, was quite unlikable, frankly. When she went over to the UK, and look, there's a context around that too, but when she went over to the UK, she was at pains to make sure people knew that she was a star first. It's just a teenage girl thing. It's not a big deal. Now that I'm older, I look back and go, of course she was going to do that because she was the biggest star. But then constantly dealing with those comparisons, and the way that she responded to it was not with the same level of class or decorum that Kylie would have dealt with it in reverse.
She's younger, though, isn't she?
She is younger, but there was a resentment about it, which obviously for mega fans of Kylie at the time, young, put that in context, it came across as resentment of Kylie's career, which I'm sure it wasn't, but it certainly did. And it was quite markedly there. And she would backhandedly slap Kylie in any interview I read at the time. Oh, my music's edgier and funkier. Yeah, I don't. She didn't literally say, I don't like Kylie's music, but there were quite a few interviews where she described Kylie's music as bubblegum pop. I think that was one of the famous quotes at the time. There was always a backhander to Kylie, and I thought it's just not necessary.
But at that point, Kylie didn't like her music either. That's why she wrote on Dannii's album.
Which is why I bought Dannii's album. Actually, that brings us full circle. The only reason I went out of my way to buy Dannii's debut album is because Kylie was making her debut on this album as a songwriter, because she was, obviously it started to leak into news headlines at the time that Kylie was starting to rattle the cage, that she might want to leave the pop factory, that she wanted some more creative control, and here was her avenue to do it. So I bought it, and I have to admit, it took a while to adjust, because don't forget, this is a little guy whose head has been filled with Stock Aitken and Waterman for 3 or 4 years by that stage. Now I'm listening to this sort of Janet wannabe sound. It took me a few listens, but after a few listens, I must admit, I was on it. I was not becoming a fan of Dannii, I wouldn't say that, but I did love the music.
I mean, context, I was a massive Kylie fan at that point as well. I had all of her albums, but I think I gravitated towards Dannii for all the reasons that she said and that you've just indicated, because I was also a big Janet fan and a big Prince fan. And I think that I gravitated towards Dannii because her music was a little bit edgier and a little bit more adult. And I do think, I don't know if you're going to hate me for this, but I do think that there's a lot of music on here that kind of was a precursor to KM94. Like, I can hear a lot.
Oh, no. Stop it.
I think there's a lot. I knew you were going to have an issue with that.
Well, I do. I mean, totally.
I think there's definitely moments where it always feels like, not that Dannii did it first, but I do feel like Dannii always gets told that she's copying Kylie, and I think quite often I actually thought it was the other way around. And I did think that when I got KM94, I was like, oh, this sounds a bit like a Dannii album.
Oh, my goodness. I would say, I'm just guessing here, but that is because of the way it made you feel rather than the actual music. Because when I listened to Dannii, I know that at the time it was described as, and you've used the word there, a more mature version of Kylie's sort of pop music. When you actually dig into it, it's not. These songs, much as I love them and they're beloved to me, and we're going to go through a few of them in a minute,
yeah,
there is a great immaturity in them, frankly. I keep listening to, and especially in the delivery, I listen to a lot of this, and this is not an authentic original album. This is a girl who's desperately trying to appear like a number of other people, and that's, by my definition, one of the indicators of immaturity. There's, I want to be Janet, I want to be a rapper, I want to wear a leather jacket, I want to be Prince. There's all of that in here. And as I listened to it, even recently, to get myself refamiliarized with it, I thought, oh, you poor girl, you were just so desperate to be seen in the likes of Janet's and Madonna's.
But I think the sound is more mature, so I think that's what people were referring to, and I think that that there is definitely a mature sound in the music. The lyrics, no. But, I mean, specifically, I'm sure we'll get to it, but specifically, I Don't Want to Take This Pain, to me, sounds like it could have been on KM94. Like,
okay, well, in that particular case, I can see a link. Yep, absolutely. That's a brilliant song. So hard to forget a little bit as well, I suppose. Okay, so in a couple of instances, maybe. Before we actually look at some of the tracks on this debut album, let's learn a little bit about Dannii for those who might not be as familiar as you and I. She was born in 1971, Danielle Jane Minogue. And as I said, she was one of Australia's most popular public figures when she starred on Young Talent Time. That was from 1982 to 1988. That was the quintessential television family. To be honest, it was a very big event when she left. And then she went on to emulate Kylie's soap opera success, appearing as Emma on Home and Away for about 18 months. There you go. There's another reason for me to be cynical. You know, Kylie's been successful in a soap opera, so Dannii plays the opposite character on Home and Away, the rival program. Maybe a couple of years, but yeah, it wasn't long. She made quite an impression for the short amount of time she was there.
I didn't even watch it.
What was that, sorry?
I didn't even watch it and I knew she was in it.
Yeah, it was sort of big news too, the way she flicked her hair around and tried to pour milkshakes on people's heads. She released her debut album, which we're talking about today, in 1990, as you've said, but 91 in the UK. And throughout the years, she's appeared in a number of live stage shows, including Greece and Notre Dame de Paris, amazing performances of Live for the One I Love, one of her best pieces of work, in my opinion. I love that live performance.
She was so good.
Everything exploded in 2007 when she joined the UK's X Factor, and she famously slept with Simon Cowell, while Sharon Osbourne couldn't cope with the jealousy. Dannii Minogue is known for some fashion lines that she's put out, certainly over here in Australia. Target carries Dannii Minogue's Petites. And on the personal front, she was married to Julian McMahon. He was the son of a former Australian Prime Minister. She's had quite a few relationships, very similar to Kylie in that sense. And then she met Chris Smith. And although they're no longer together, they had a baby named Ethan together in 2010. More recently, she's been on the panel of Masked Singer in Australia, and she caused controversy very recently for seemingly flouting the COVID rules in Australia. She returned to our country from overseas and got to complete her quarantine in a private residence, unlike the rest of us mere mortals. And Kylie, of course, learnt from that episode. She came back home and quarantined in the prescribed way.
Sometimes amateurs know best, and a lack of professionalism is all you'll hear on the Time to Talk show. Join Tim and his panel of guests as they wade their way through a range of news, music, and pop culture treats. Time to Talk, the show hosted by amateurs for unprofessional listeners. Amateurs, is this the best that they could do?
Wow.
Who is she as a person, Simon?
I don't know. I don't know if I should judge that. I've got her autobiography and I've not finished it, which is bad, isn't it?
Can't blame you. Honestly, I got to pick up on that. It's one of the most audacious autobiographies I've ever read, and if you compare it to interviews like on TV, it's the same thing. The lady she lives her life by sales figures, chart positions,
but I think she
awards.
Has to, because no one's ever given her the correct credit for her talent, so she has to. What else is she supposed to do? Because people are always constantly saying that she's in her sister's shadow. So, I was watching, in preparation for this, I watched a tiny bit of her on CD UK when Neon Nights came out, and she was being interviewed, and all they did was, it was Kat Deely, and all she did was ask her about Kylie. And I was like, she's literally like, Neon Nights was a massive album, and she's promoting one of the biggest pop albums of that year. And all they did was ask her about Kylie and when Kylie was going to be back again. And I'm, so I'm not surprised that she spends all of her time, talking about her achievements, because people forget her achievements and they just go, oh yeah, she's Kylie's sister. It's like, well, no, she's actually been quite a big pop star, especially, I'm not as au fait with how big she was in Australia, but she was really big over here.
But there's just a bit of humility required, I would have thought. Like, if you listen to a Dannii Minogue interview, barely one goes past where she's not showing off a trophy or showing off a sales figure. She knows them down to the odd number. By the way, I sold 427 copies of Love and Kisses on September. It's unbelievable the detail that she knows. I feel sorry for her, Simon. That's what I'm saying. I'm not denigrating her for it. And also, you mentioned the word. For me, it's not about arrogance. It's about a tragedy, actually. I think she's totally trying to live up to her parents' expectations, actually. There's been a few little flippant comments she's made in the book and in some interviews, very, very fleeting and very passing, but it seems to me like she really wants to be seen as successful in their eyes. You sort of jokingly said that you were braced for this conversation about Dannii, but I'm going to put it right on the table now. She is delightful. She is lovely. She is beautiful, compassionate, and generous and warm. Every time I see her, and as she's blossomed into a woman, especially, like she is delightful. So I make that clear. I don't want that to be ambiguous. I don't feel badly about Dannii. I think she is wonderful.
When she was in Notre Dame de Paris, was around the time of Neon Nights, and she was still gigging, and she would be doing shows, and then she'd be rehearsing, because one of my mates was one of her dancers at the time, and she would be rehearsing her gigs, and I actually saw her, I think, at GAY in that period, and around the show. So she'd do a full show in the West End, and then pop over to GAY and do like a half an hour set at GAY as well.
Yeah, and like the hard-working thing I admire, but there's also tragedy wrapped up in it. The Terry Wogan show, she was on there, and I think it was Love and Kisses that she performed on that show. And behind the scenes, she was there. She was the first one on the set. She spent the whole day. She went through the routine countless times before she actually performed it on the show. I find that really sad, because that's not discipline like Madonna. That's desperation.
I don't know if I think it is. So the other thing that I didn't say earlier, when talking about whether I preferred Dannii or Kylie, is that I also think Dannii is a better dancer. And I don't know if that's maybe what made me gravitate towards her more, because obviously as a dancer, and especially as a kid, when I was 10, when Love and Kisses came out, I used to go to like holiday camps and stuff with my parents. And I remember one year, that year in 91, we were at a particular holiday camp, and every time Dannii came on, I would be straight up on the dance floor. And the woman that ran kind of the entertainment came over to my parents and was like, he needs to enter the talent competition. And it was because I knew the dance routine to Love and Kisses. And she'd seen me doing that. And she said, oh, you get up to all the Dannii Minogue stuff and you know all the dance moves and everything. And so I think I must have really gravitated towards her as a dancer. And I suppose because the people that she reminded me of then, like Janet and Paula Abdul and people like that, were dancers that were doing that kind of New Jack Swing thing. Whereas I think, Kylie's dancing was quite limited, really, to start with, and has always been a bit wooden. And they managed
Oh, now come on. No.
It has. And, Fever, which is the best she's ever looked dancing, they specifically chose a choreographer whose style fitted, really well how she moved. Like they managed to get that really, really well. But I do think that Kylie's always struggled a bit.
No, I don't agree with that at all. I think Danny's choreography was more exciting, and definitely she put more emphasis on her dancing. 100% couldn't agree with you more there. But Kylie can really move. One of my biggest criticisms of Kylie is that she can dance beautifully, but she doesn't. And especially now, like, she refuses to move. She strains herself to walk across the stage these days. But dancing, she is a really awesome dancer. You go and watch her dance routines of Shocked and What Do I Have to Do, and all of those ones that Venol choreographed back in the day. She can do it. She just doesn't particularly want to. And
she doesn't
her
look
routines
like a dancer to me, whereas Dannii does.
She doesn't look like a dancer, did you say?
Whereas Dannii does.
Yeah. Well, look, I think that comes down to the routines. Like, I'd say that Danny's routines and choreography were grittier and more exciting because of her music. And I think Kylie's music, I think they choreographed for it perfectly. But, look, I mean, a lot of people have said that Danny's the better dancer. I just don't know if I agree with it. I just think that she had more opportunity to do great choreography.
Yeah, possibly.
Okay, let's look at this album before we go anywhere. I mean, Party Jam, again, I'm going through the track listing for the Australian version.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, we don't necessarily have to hit on every track, but Party Jam.
You're doing the Australian one?
Yeah, but you can take me up. That's all right. I noticed with Party Jam they put the quite a long version for the opening of the Australian album, and then they've cut it right back for the UK version. I find that a little bit amusing because the conspiracy behind that in my fantasy head is that they went, "Oh, this isn't as good as we first thought. Let's snip a minute off it."
Yeah, I think that's probably quite accurate.
and they buried it in the second half of the album for you guys.
I mean,
because it's quite embarrassing, actually. It's a little bit embarrassing. It's like, I don't know. This is what I meant by immaturity. I find this is the definition of that for me on this album. It's like, I don't know. She's very squeaky voiced and in the middle of like a party sound effect, and just going, "It's a party jam."
I think that, so my reading of the situation from 90 to 91, from looking into it and looking at the track listings of the albums, is that they focused on one side of her for Australia, which was the kind of poppier side, and then realised that that wasn't the album that they'd released, so then had to kind of try and make it appear slightly cooler by rejigging the tracks around and putting remixes on and stuff. Because I think it does feel very much like they led with something that they thought was going to be a lot more commercial, but actually it just isn't the strongest thing.
Well, I think in both regions, I think they wanted to market her as a grittier version of Kylie, no doubt about it. I think she was trying to do the same if you look at her wardrobe and the photography around that time. Even I look at the track Success, which was released as a single. She had a hand in writing that. There was just something, I don't care, I'm going to use the word. There's something a bit desperate in a lot of these tracks and around the marketing of this album. They just are. But it was fairly successful too. What are the standout tracks for you on this album?
Don't Want to Take This Pain. I love Success. I love Love and Kisses. To be honest, I love about 2/3 of it. Like really, really heavily love about 2/3 of it. I love Jump to the Beat. Jump to the Beat was massive over here. I really like
that. Wasn't on ours, was it? That wasn't on the Australian version.
I didn't think Jump to the Beat was on yours either. That was one of the things here. And I didn't like Love Traffic at the time, but looking back at it now, I think it's brilliant. But yeah, Baby Love, obviously, which was on ours, that wasn't on yours. I think it's a really strong album, but those are kind of, I think, my standouts. I like Attitude and I like Work, but I'm not as, like, I don't remember them as well without going into it to listen to them.
And for me, there's not a single track on this album that I don't like. I think every track is really good. Like I say, though, when you listen to some of them in isolation, there's a little bit of tragedy in the fact that they're trying to emulate other people. But nonetheless, it was of its time. I thought Love Traffic was great. I was like you. It took me a long time to like that song. And I remember thinking, oh my God, if Kylie is going to release an album like this, because we all thought she was leaving Stock Aitken and Waterman, if she's writing her whole album, we're in trouble. I remember thinking that, even though I like it, this is not the direction that I was so comfortable with. I really love So Hard to Forget. For some reason, I think it's a beautiful song. I noticed with I Don't Want to Take This Pain, they really beefed it up for the UK version.
Yeah, the version of the UK was incredible.
Yeah, they just added a bit of thumpy, almost rap-like beats over the top of it, which I thought was a shame because it sort of took it from a ballad. It's what you're used to, isn't it? I was used to quite a ballady song, and then yours was much more R&B almost. Attitude, True Lovers, Work, Call to Your Heart, and So Hard to Forget, as you said. I think it's a great album. I think Love and Kisses is a good song as well.
I mean, yeah, and did I mention Success, which is like one of my favourite songs ever in the entire world.
Driving fancy cars and wearing fancy things, dripping with diamonds and gold.
I love it so much. And it was my first experience of someone stylizing the way that a title was written, because it's got all the dollar signs in it. I can't really. I have to fight really hard to fault it as as a pop album. Like, I think, especially for the time it came out, it was quite edgy. And there was even edgier stuff if you listen to the deluxe that didn't make it onto the album. I mean, Hallucination is like an actual acid house song. She's hardly present on it, but it's incredible. So you can tell they'd obviously recorded a lot of stuff that was a bit edgier. And I suppose maybe they didn't think it was, like, people weren't ready for it, I suppose, in 91.
It went gold in the UK. It sold 100,000 copies. It peaked at number 8, so it was a top 10 album, which is huge in the UK. That means a lot of sales. In Australia, it got to number 24 at its peak.
Really?
I don't think it was certified. Yeah, shit. I don't think it made platinum or gold over here.
Like
its aim was to get her profile up and to transition her from a TV screen personality to a music icon. And probably, Simon, part of that reason for the dull position is because she headed off to the UK to promote it. That's where her target market was. She was over there doing the performances. You had bigger hits, Baby Love and Jump to the Beat. We didn't have those.
Yeah. But Love and Kisses
we didn't
big over here as well.
What was that?
Love and Kisses and Success were both big over here as well.
Yeah, and see, I don't Love and Kisses was fairly successful here. It was played on Rage over and over, so it must have made it up in the charts. But I do think there's a really good reason why it was more successful in the UK than here. Talk about the videos.
Well, I mean, they were all very of their time, weren't they? Like the Success video specifically, I remember being very kind of those videos that everyone was doing with the kind of hip hop elements and the dancing and the kind of that's the one with all the blank backgrounds, isn't it? Where she's kind of with all the coloured backgrounds and stuff. And I think that it's all very of its time, isn't it? We just had Top of the Pops, and people used to come on, and she used to come on and perform on Top of the Pops. So we very rarely saw any of the videos over here. So I've only really watched them like kind of since on YouTube and stuff.
Love and Kisses, I think the editor should be fired because you've got to go through screenshot by screenshot for the final product. And there is one screenshot of Dannii looking a little bit intoxicated, possibly, with a big question mark right next to her face. So if you pause that makes a bad screen grab. You don't want that in the video clip. Should have been edited out. when I caught hold of the later videos for Baby Love and Jump to the Beat, I thought those were great. I don't know what they did with Baby Love. Like you say, a bit of its time, but almost animated in a way. Like that whatever filter they used or whatever. I love Baby Love. I think there's something mystical about that.
Yeah. It's strange, isn't it? And I don't think the videos necessarily would have done her any favours sales-wise, but I suppose in the UK it wasn't a problem. I remember the first video off the second album, I think it was the first video, a lot better than I remember any of the videos off this album.
Well, there was a Love and Kisses video collection released, as artists tend to do back then. Jump to the Beat, Love and Kisses, I Don't Want to Take This Pain, Success, Baby Love, and an interview including home and away footage as a bonus little item on there. Fascinatingly to me, it was re-released in 2009, and when I tried to put my head around that, being here in Australia, it of course occurred to me that she would have been at her peak over there with X Factor. Yeah. She would have been a couple of seasons in by that stage. So, yeah, they've re-released the whole thing in 2009 as a deluxe edition.
Was that when the Greatest Hits came out as well? Was that around that time? Hits and Beyond?
I would probably guess, yes.
I'm wondering if it was around the same time as Hits and Beyond, because I was very obsessed with the new stuff she was doing and the album that was supposed to be coming out that never came out. So I don't know if I would have necessarily gone back because I have Love and Kisses on CD anyway. So I probably wouldn't have bothered.
Well, it's just full, that deluxe edition, of little treasures, I would say. It's a little bit of a mess in some way. Different 7-inch mixes, album versions, master mixes, edits. It's full of it. And Party Jam, I'm going to go and listen to this after this, the Bruce Forrest 7-inch mix of Party Jam. Because that song amuses me, I'm going to go and listen to that.
It is better than the normal version.
What would you give this album out of 10, Simon?
Oof. Okay, I'm going to give it 2 scores. On a nostalgic value for like myself, I'm going to give it a 9. But for like objectively looking at it as somebody that isn't a massive fan of Dannii anyway, probably like a 7.5.
How interesting. You've gone exactly where I was heading. I think it's a good 7.5. I remember my parents had laid new carpet in the house when I played this for the first time, and it probably was toxic, but it smelt delightful. So I was listening to Dannii and breathing in the fumes of the new carpet. So whenever I listened to this album, I'm straight back into that house, breathing in the fumes, going, I wonder why I love Dannii's album so much.
That's hilarious.
It's quite funny. Yeah, it's actually true. Like I could still smell it. It had a very distinct, made in a Chinese factory smell. It's been interesting talking to you, Simon. We're going to have to do a few more Dannii reviews, and I'm sure that Neon Light would be high on your agenda.
Yeah, that and Girl would be great.
Take care of yourself.